Welcome to the Rally Chronicles. I'm here with Joe Coe, who's the Director of Education and Digital Strategy from the Global Healthy Living Foundation. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a delight.
My pleasure. Could you just tell us a little bit about your migraine journey?
Yeah, so I developed migraine in my mid to late teens, probably around 14 or 15. I don't really remember. It could be 13, it could be 15, but it was around that time. And I just remember having to go to my room, put a cold rag over my head, close the blinds, and just be in pain and agony. Lived like that for a little bit, didn't get diagnosed until I was an undergrad in college, so in my late teens, early 20s. And I have been a migraine advocate formally through my work at GHLF for almost 10 years.
That's wonderful. How many attacks are you getting a month, may I ask?
So fortunately, I have found really good treatments in the plural. So I do a couple of different things. It got my baseline headache days down a lot. I was having more headache days than not. I was definitely chronic. And now I'll say I'll get an attack 1 to 4 times a month.
Oh, that's wonderful. Good for you. I'm glad you found an adequate treatment. That's spectacular. Today, Joe and I are going to talk about migraine and language. Joe recently wrote an article, "The Migraine Community Needs to Oust the Word Police," that was published on the Medium in February. And Joe, can you tell us a little bit or a lot about that?
Sure. So migraine advocacy is obviously near and dear to my heart. And I've really seen how our community has evolved and become stronger and developed ways to talk about migraine that creates an impact and change. I also have seen a pushback or a diminishing of stories for people that don't prescribe to very strict language guidelines or language preferences. And while I know on an intellectual level, that's very important, it's important to show the seriousness of the disease, that it's a systemic disease, that it impacts people's lives in profound and deep ways. It really doesn't serve us as a community when we focus an undue amount of effort to educate people that live with migraine or migraine patients around this language when we're trying to access information and treatments and get to a point where I get or where I have gotten by trying all these different treatments and working with neurologists and cardiologists and my primary care physician and this whole team to get me to a place that I am today. That language doesn't matter to me as a migraine patient. What matters to me is, am I feeling better? Am I able to live the life that I want to live? Am I able to communicate my experience in a way that others can hear it? And I know that working with elected officials and other people in power, if we get too caught up in, in linguistic nuances, they're going to lose our stories. It's about the emotional connection. It's about how migraine is taking things from us, how it reduces our ability to live the healthy and happy lives that we all deserve to live.
I'll tell you, when I read that article, it really opened my eyes because, as a lot of people know, I tend to be a stickler about language. And in my sticklerishness, I lost sight of the emotional value of what it means to be a migraine patient, to live with this chronic illness. And I'm very appreciative of that because it doesn't matter if I say on an emotional level, migraine disease, migraine disorder, migraines, whatever I'm calling it, I don't want to be shamed for the fact that I said migraines or headaches, because as we know, the 60 million people who have this don't call it migraine disease. They call it migraine. And then those people who don't know that they have migraine are just calling it a headache. So by saying something like only it's migraine disease, we're losing a lot of the population.
Oh, definitely. And Nancy, when we were talking before we recorded, I was sharing with you how many people in my life come out to me as having migraine or living with migraines, and they're not using the language that our organizations might use, but they're in with providers or not even with providers and getting subpar treatment and don't even realize that there are new innovative therapies that are on the market. So I do a lot of personal education around this baseline knowledge that we all in the migraine advocacy community take for granted. Even with all the commercials that are on TV, I can tell you so many people, my peers in their 30s, that may even be with general neurologists, are not even realizing that there's all these new treatments that can help people. They certainly helped me. And I'm like, what are we doing wrong? And I think part of it, not a giant part, but definitely part of it is that we talk to ourselves in this migraine advocacy community, and we're not looking at what will really change the paradigm around treatment and access. And it's not correcting someone if they say, I'm having migraines versus I'm having a migraine attack. It's about how do we actually let people know that there is hope and there's innovation and there's really interesting science that's out there that's helping people like me live better lives. And that's my passion. And that's one of the reasons why GHLF created the Talking Head Pain podcast, because we wanted to share stories of folks that were not being highlighted in the migraine community. So as a gay person, I'm no stranger to the importance of language. They sometimes joke that we're the alphabet mafia, LGBTQ plus, lesbian,
Mm-hmm.
gay, bisexual, transgender, queer plus. And language is super important. How we define ourselves is super important. I would never correct someone based on how they define themselves, and migraine advocates shouldn't do that to each other.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's imperative that we don't do that to each other, especially as advocates and patient leaders. I mean, if we don't support each other, how are we going to support the community? When you were talking about your friends reaching out and people looking for answers with migraine, it made me think of the people that I speak with online on a daily basis. So many don't know that there are doctors who are true experts in headache disease and will have been going to general neurologists for years and years and years. And it's as we know, startling that people don't know. Well, how come they? Well, because nobody talks about it. And if we're putting language stigma on top of the stigma surrounding migraine, we're never going to move the needle. It just
Uh, Definitely. And just for the general neurologist, there are great ones. My
absolutely
neurologist is a general neurologist. He is not a headache specialist. And I really clicked with him. And that's what I say to my friends and people that reach out. You have to find providers that will listen to you. I had a friend talking about a provider totally dismissing her, saying that it's just her hormones and her period, and that's why she's getting these attacks, and she's not eligible for different treatments than birth control and some of the much older medications. I said, you know what? It sounds like this doctor who happened to be a neurologist isn't listening to you. Here are a couple in the area that I know probably will. They might not, but I suspect that they will. Here's a list. Go see one of them if you can. And she did and is having a much better experience. But you shouldn't need to know you or me or have
right.
some special connection to get that information. And that's why it's so important that we educate people on all levels, in all ways, in the languages that they speak, both natively in terms of actual language and how we communicate with each other and how we talk. Some of us don't go to college and have a formal education, so
Absolutely.
we might not understand some of these concepts. So we need to really break down how we discuss things in a really digestible and accessible way.
Right. You've made a great point because we're dealing with it all day, every day. We know the nuances of the language and the disease, but that's not the general public. And we need to take that into account when we're talking about it, which is so vital.
When I talk to people about migraine treatment, I'm like, you may have seen commercials or a celebrity talk about it. And sometimes they don't haven't even seen the commercials, but often they have. And I'm like, that's something you should talk to your doctor about. But even with the commercials, it hasn't clicked to them. But I use that as a launching point instead of saying, well, there are new CGRPs on the market that
Yeah,
do
right.
X, Y, and Z to your. So I don't go there because no, like that's just word diarrhea for people.
Right.
And these are people that are in pain, that are not getting the treatment that they deserve, and they might not remember, they might not understand at that point, and it's not important. what's important, what I've learned is that we communicate the fact that there's hope, that you should not settle for a provider that's not listening to you, and that you should really push for the best treatments that you can get. And once you find a provider that will fight with you, then you have a much greater chance of having more headache-free days.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Do you think there's well, I know there's a generational thing. People of my age and above will stick with the same doctor because they're a doctor and they tell you what to do. Do you find there's more flexibility in your generation, that they're more willing to take the steps needed to find the right treatment once they know that it's out there?
I have to think about that more. I don't have an answer today. I haven't thought about intergenerational ways in which we communicate with our providers. I think just my gut says it can go in two directions. Either people that have less experience navigating life might feel more trapped, like this
Mhm.
is the expert. And people that have more experience might have gone through it more and have had bad experiences with other providers and have said, you know what, I'm going to stop this early because I'm
Mhm.
not going to waste this year with this doctor. So it's a really interesting question and something that if there isn't research done on it, there should be, because that would really help tailor how we talk to people.
Right. Maybe we can have another conversation about that at some point.
I would
I'm
love
gonna
that.
Great. I'm gonna thank you for your time. I'm gonna put a link for the Talking Head podcast and your article, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you so much. You guys are an amazing partner at Chronic Migraine Awareness. Appreciate all that you do.
And the same to Global Healthy Living Foundation. Thank you.